The desert after midnight holds a chill that seeps deeper than any winter you've ever known. It's not the clean, crisp cold of mountain air or the damp chill of coastal regions. This cold is ancient and absolute, born from the vacuum of a star-dusted sky and a deep, dry earth. It penetrates layers, settles in the marrow of your bones, and whispers of the emptiness that stretches for hundreds of miles. For over a decade with the Navajo Nation Police, I've served these frozen nights. My name is James. Most folks call me Jimmy, but my family uses my full name, a small tradition, a tether to something older than this badge. After studying criminal law at the University of New Mexico, I came straight back. Everyone asked why. I could have had a quieter career, a safer life in some city precinct. But those things fell hollow. My place was here, watching over this land and its people, a responsibility that felt more like a covenant than a job. The Navajo Nation is a vast, echoing place. At over 27,000 square miles, it's larger than several states back east, yet home to fewer than 200,000 souls. My patrols took me down roads that were more suggestion than pavement, through landscapes where juniper and sagebrush stood as silent sentinels against time. The silence here isn't empty. It's full. It's the sound of wind sculpting sandstone over millennia, the distant cry of a hawk, the memory of footsteps that walked this red earth centuries before mine. Most nights were a familiar rhythm. Domestic calls fueled by hardship and cheap liquor, kids testing boundaries on backroad turnoffs, the endless paperwork that is the true backbone of law enforcement anywhere. I had settled into the rhythm, the deep freeze of a December night, the steam of my coffee against the station window. But on a Tuesday, at precisely 11:47 p.m., the rhythm shattered. I was at the Window Rock Station, the night shift's quiet hum, a familiar soundtrack. Officer Ben Nez was across the room, his brow furrowed over paperwork. Two others were discussing a recent truck theft. I had my boots on the desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, reviewing a mundane incident report about a stray cattle. Then the radio dispatch crackled with a tension that immediately straightened my spine. All units, stand by for a 10 to 55. Livestock disturbance. Location is 8 miles north of Sawmill. Off Route 12. Caller reports unexplained animal activity. There was a pause, the kind filled with static and unease. Caller has used the term, Yinaldlushai. I repeat, the term Yinaldlushai has been invoked. The effect was instantaneous and profound. All conversation died. Ben Nez looked up from his forms, his eyes finding mine across the room. The younger officer, Eddie, went very still. Even the sergeant, a man who'd seen 30 years of every horror humanity could conjure, slowly set down his pen. The word hung in the heated air of the station, cold and heavy. Yinaldlushai. To the outside ear, just a string of syllables. To us, it was a key turning in a very old, very dark lock. It refers to a shapeshifter, a practitioner of witchcraft who can take the form of an animal. It is not a word spoken lightly, especially not after sunset. Speaking, it is believed to draw attention from the very forces it names. To hear it uttered on an official police frequency, by a dispatcher whose voice was tight with fear, meant the caller was beyond scared. They were convinced. Unit 7, respond. The dispatcher's voice was a controlled monotone, but I heard the strained, I keyed the mic, Unit 7, copy. Go ahead with details. Caller is Thomas Begay, age 58. Residence is a homestead off the old Trading Post Road. 3 sheep confirmed deceased. Reports unusual footprints and vocalizations. Not consistent with known predators. Advise extreme caution. Copy. En route. ETA 30 minutes. As I stood, the gear belt heavy on my hips, Ben approached. His face was grave. Jimmy, You know what that word means. I do. It's not just a story tonight, he said, his voice low. When someone uses it on a call, they've seen something that broke their understanding of the world. They're not reporting a crime. They're reporting a violation. I nodded, checking my flashlight batteries. Protocol is protocol. We investigate. He put a hand on my shoulder. The protocol was written for coyotes and drunks, not for that. Just keep your eyes open. Wider than you think you need to. Since a national documentary had once filmed on the reservation years ago, the department maintained an unspoken but ironclad policy. Every call with a supernatural element was treated with utmost seriousness. Not because the official stance admitted belief, but because we understood that when our people rooted in this land and its story for generations, were frightened enough to call the police, something tangible and threatening was happening. Whether it was a predator, a person, or something else entirely. The fear was real, and where there was fear, there was often danger. The cold hit me like a wall as I left the station, a dry, biting cold that stole my breath. My patrol vehicle, a white Ford Explorer emblazoned with Navajo Nation Police in bold letters, waited in the icy lot. The dashboard read 19 degrees. Route 12 was a pitch-black seam through a darker world. My headlights carved a trembling tunnel in the absolute darkness, illuminating nothing but the faded center line and the skeletal shapes of sagebrush. This was a true reservation, far from the scattered clusters of housing. This was the ancient, watchful land. As I drove, I turned the call over in my mind. Thomas Begay. I knew the name vaguely. A sheep herder, a quiet man who kept himself, not the type for hysteria. 3 sheep. Coyotes were the likely culprit, or maybe a mountain lion ranging far. But the details, unusual footprints, vocalizations, and that word, that damned word, it sat in my gut like a stone. The turnoff was easy to miss. A gap in the scrub marked by the crumbling remains of an old trading post, its adobe walls melting back into the earth. The dirt road beyond was a testament to neglect, a rutted, jarring path that forced me to crawl. Each pothole sent a shock through the suspension. The 3 miles to the Begay place felt like 30. The isolation was profound, a pressure on the eardrums. Finally, my headlights swept over a mailbox with a red flag, then up a long drive to a cluster of buildings, a modest manufactured home, a sheep pen, a tool shed. The property was silent, but not peaceful. I pulled up silent, the tires crunching on frozen gravel. The first thing I saw was a sheep pen. The gate was wide open, swinging slightly on its hinges. Not torn off, not forced. Unlatched, I radioed in my position, my voice sounding strangely small in the vast quiet. Stepping out, the cold clamped down instantly. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, a shaky blade of white. Mr. Begay? Navajo Nation Police. The front door of the home opened immediately, as if he'd been standing right behind it. Thomas Begay emerged, wrapped in a thick blanket over his clothes. He wasn't a tall man, but he carried the solid, grounded presence of someone who worked the land. His face, however, was etched with something that erased that solidity. It was more than fear. It was a deep, disorienting dread, the look of a man whose fundamental map of reality had just been ripped in half. "Officer," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "You came. I didn't know if you would." "Of course, Mr. Begay. You reported a problem with your sheep. Can you show me?" He nodded, his eyes darting past me toward the blackness beyond the circle of light from the house. "It's not right," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "None of it is right." He led the way toward the pen, his steps slow and reluctant. The beam of my flashlight bobbed ahead, and then it found the first carcass. The scene in the pen was a still life of violation. 3 of Begay's sheep lay dead in the frozen dirt. My police training kicked in first, a clinical assessment that tried to overlay order onto chaos. I'd seen predator kills before, the messy, frantic work of coyotes, the efficient neck bite of a mountain lion, the indiscriminate savagery of feral dogs. This was none of those things. This was something else entirely. I knelt, the cold of the earth immediately seeping through my uniform pants. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I traced the details. The animals were killed with a precision that was deeply unnerving. The wounds at their throats were not tears or rips. They were clean cuts, as if made by a very sharp, narrow blade. There was a startling lack of blood, only a dark, frozen slick beneath each neck, not the sprayed arterial mess of natural attack. But it was the limbs that truly defied logic. The front legs of each sheep were bent backward at the knee joint, folded under their bodies in positions that were anatomically impossible. A sheep's leg doesn't bend that way without dislocation, without the snap of tendon and bone. Yet, as I shone my light closer, I saw no visible trauma, no broken skin, no grotesque swelling. It was as if the joints had been persuaded, gently manipulated into a nightmare pose. I found him like this, Begay whispered from behind me. His voice was hollow. I didn't touch nothing. I just saw and I called. You did the right thing, I said, my own voice sounding detached. I pulled out my digital camera, the flash stark and violent in the darkness. Click, click. I documented the scene from every angle. The clean cuts, the impossible angles of the legs, the way the bodies were arranged almost formally, not scattered from a struggle. There were no defensive wounds on the sheep, no sign they had tried to run or fight. They had been killed swiftly, then meticulously rearranged. The word that surfaced in my mind was curated. You mentioned tracks, I said, standing and brushing the dirt from my knees. He pointed a trembling finger toward the far side of the pen, where the wire fence met the open desert. Over there. They come from out there, and they go back out there, but they change. I moved to where he indicated, my beam scanning the ground. At first, the prints were familiar. Canine, large, a big dog or a wolf. For toe pads, claw marks evident in the frost-rimed soil. The stride was normal. I began taking photos, a catalog of evidence. But after about 10 feet, the story the ground told began to twist. The stride length increased dramatically, as if the creature had gone from a walk to a sprint in one step. The impressions deepened, suggesting a sudden increase in weight or force. And then, gradually, the shape of the front prints began to alter. The toe pads elongated. An extra, smaller pad impression appeared, then another. The neat canine oval distorted, spreading, becoming less paw-like and more hand-like. By the time the tracks reached the fence line, the front prints were unmistakable. They were impressions of a hand, a four-fingered hand with a thumb, pressed deep into the soil. But it was a wrong hand. The fingers were too long and thin, the knuckle impressions too pronounced and oddly spaced. The thumb was set too low, at an angle that would be clumsy for a human. It was a crude imitation, a child's drawing of a hand made real in dirt and violence. See, Begay breathed. It was walking on all fours. Then it stood up, used its hands. I don't know, but it changed right here while it was walking. My mouth was dry. I'd had tracking training. I could differentiate between bobcat and lynx, between black bear and grizzly scat. These tracks were a biological impossibility. No animal metamorphoses mid-stride. The cold was forgotten, replaced by a different kind of chill that started in my spine. On a strand of barbed wire, I spotted a tuft of coarse, gray hair. Using evidence tweezers in the bag, I collected it. Under my flashlight, it looked like coyote fur, but as I turned the bag, I saw the individual hairs taper to an unnatural fineness at the tips, almost translucent, unlike the consistent thickness of true animal guard hairs. "What do you think it is, officer?" Begay's question was direct, pleading for an anchor in a world that had become unmoored. I chose my words with the care of a bomb technician. "Mr. Begay, something killed your sheep. The method is highly unusual. These tracks," I gestured at a loss, "they don't match any wildlife I'm familiar with. I'm going to collect more evidence and request a wildlife specialist from the BIA at First Light. They'll have more expertise." He nodded, but his eyes said he hadn't gotten the answer he needed. He needed a name for the terror. Before he turned to go, I asked a question that had been burning since the dispatch call. "Mr. Begay, on the radio, you use a specific term." He stared out into the desert, his profile etched against the star field. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he spoke, his voice gaining a resonance that seemed to draw from the land itself. "My grandfather," he began, "when I was a boy, he told me stories of the edges. Not the stories for the books or the schools. The old stories. He said there are things that live in the in-between places. Not animal, not man, not spirit. Things that are left over from when the world was still being dreamed. They watch. They learn the shapes of things. He said they are drawn to fear, because fear is a bright light in the dark to them." He looked at me, his eyes old. He told me if I ever saw something that was almost right, but wrong in its bones, to not say its name, but to name what it is. So I did. I named it. He shivered, not from the cold. "My family is leaving tonight. We're going to my cousin's in Chinley. I suggest you don't stay out here long alone, officer. It's still watching. I can feel it." After he left, the silence descended again, but now it was charged, expectant. I was alone with the posed corpses and the blasphemous tracks. My duty was clear: follow the trail. It led from the fence, back out into the open desert. The beam of my flashlight became my entire world, a small bubble of reality, moving through an ocean of unknown. The morphing tracks continued, a steady, mocking breadcrumb trail. And then, in the middle of a flat, soft patch of sand, they stopped, not faded, not obscured by rocks or brush. They stopped as if the creature making them had simply vanished into thin air. One final, deep handprint, and then nothing. I stood in the center of my tiny circle of light, turning slowly. The void pressed in from all sides. That's when the first call came. It was a coyote's yip howl, the signature sound of desert night. But it was off. The rhythm was syncopated wrong. A beat too long between the yip and the howl. Then the howl itself gliding up in pitch where it should have fallen. It came from the northeast, about 100 yards out. My hand went to my sidearm. A second call answered from directly behind me. I spun, flashlight sweeping. Empty darkness. This one had been closer. The cadence even more jarring. The tone rasping like stones grinding. A third call from my left now. So close it could have been just beyond the scrub. This wasn't a coyote. This was mimicry. Poor, learning mimicry. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. My own breathing was thunderous. And then I saw them. 2 points of reflected light, amber green, caught in my beam about 50 yards ahead. Not the low, close-set glow of a coyote. These were higher off the ground, wider apart. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just stared with a fixed, chilling intensity. Navajo Nation Police. I called out, my voice cutting to the brittle air. Identify yourself. The eyes did not waver. No shift in the darkness to suggest a body turning. No flicker of recognition. They were simply 2 luminous discs floating in the black, locked onto me with an intelligence that felt heavy and cold. This wasn't the wary assessment of a startled animal. This was observation, calculated, detached study. I took a cautious step forward, my boot crunching on a frozen crust of earth. I am armed. Step into the light with your hands visible. In response, the eyes tilted. It was a subtle movement, but so profoundly unnatural it froze the breath in my lungs. They didn't turn with the head. The orbs themselves rotated slightly clockwise within the socket of darkness, maintaining their same position relative to each other, but changing their angle of regard. It was the movement of a camera lens, not a living creature. A deep, primal alarm screamed in the hindbrain, the part that recognizes a predator that doesn't follow the rules. I drew my service weapon, the familiar grip doing little to steady the tremor in my hands. The muzzle searched the darkness below those unwavering points of light. Last warning. Show yourself. The eyes blinked. The motion was slow, languid, and utterly wrong. The lids, or what I perceived as lids, closed from the bottom upward, a slow sweep like a theater curtain rising in reverse. For a full second, there was only darkness where they had been. When they reopened, they were gone. Not a retreat into shadows, not a darting movement. They were simply extinguished, as if a switch had been thrown. I stood there, weapon aimed at nothing, heart hammering against my ribs. The silence rushed back in, now feeling like a hell breath after scream. I was exposed, a single point of warmth and sound in a frozen, watching landscape. Fumbling with my free hand, I keyed the mic on my shoulder radio, my voice tight. Dispatch, Unit 7. I am at the Begay homestead. I need immediate backup. Requesting Officer Nez with the mobile spotlight unit. Advise all responding units to approach with extreme caution. Situation is uncertain. Copy, Unit 7. Backup is en route. ETA 14 minutes. 14 minutes. An eternity. I kept my back to the relative safety of my patrol vehicle, scanning the void in a continuous, slow arc. Every rustle of sagebrush was a threat, every shifting shadow a potential ambush. The feeling of being observed never left. It intensified, a weight on the back of my neck. The entity was still here. It had just stepped back from the window of my perception. When the blinding white spear of the mobile spotlight finally carved through the night, it felt like a rescue. Ben Nez's patrol truck rumbled up, the powerful halogen mounted on its roof turning night into stark. Surreal day for 100-yard radius. Officer Editso was with him, his young face grim behind the wheel. Ben stepped out, his expression all business, but his eyes took in my posture, the drawn weapon, the way I stood in the center of that lit circle like a man on a raft. "Talk to me, Jimmy," Ben said, his voice low and steady. He carried a shotgun, held at a low, ready position. I holstered my sidearm, the report tumbling out in clipped, professional phrases. The kills, the tracks, the morphing prints, the vocalizations. Finally, the eyes. I didn't embellish, didn't try to explain. I just stated the observable facts. They formed a narrative of impossibility. Ben listened without interruption, then nodded toward the fence line. "Show me." Under the overwhelming glare of the spotlight, the tracks looked even more sinister. The progression from paw to malformed hand was indisputable, etched into the earth like a fossil record of a bad dream. Ben crouched, examining them without touching. He was a hunter, born and raised on this land. He knew its tracks like city men know street signs. His silence was more telling than any curse. "This isn't right," he finally muttered, standing and brushing dirt from his hands. "I've never seen a print change its nature like that. Not in 40 years of walking this desert." Eddie, photographing the scene, spoke up, his voice hushed. "My Shima Sani, my grandmother, she always said some things don't have a true shape. They borrow, and they're never perfect at it. There's always a flaw, a wrong bend, A shadow that falls incorrect. Before anyone could respond, Ben's radio erupted. Unit 3, dispatch. We have another 10 to 55. Livestock disturbance. Location is 6 miles north on Route 12, Black Rock Wash area. Caller reports 3 sheep missing. Sounds of disturbance. Property of the Saltclaw family. Ben and I locked eyes. 3 sheep, 6 miles north. Copy, dispatch. Ben keyed his mic. Unit 3 and Unit 7 are clear of the Begay scene, responding to the new location. Unit 7, I said, I'll secure this scene for the BIA team. Negative. Ben shook his head. You're with us. Eddie will stay. Preserve the scene. You've seen its work. I want your eyes on the new one. The drive north was a tense, silent vigil. The spotlight truck led, turning the road into a tunnel of white. My mind raced, plotting the points on a mental map. Begay's place, then Saltcloth is 6 miles north. A straight line up Route 12. A pattern, clean and deliberate. The Saltcloth property told the same story, but the horror was fresher. The gate unlatched. 3 sheep, gone from a panicked milling flock. No bodies yet, but on the perimeter, we found the tracks. They started as canine, and, just as before, they gradually morphed into those long-fingered, wrong-handed impressions before disappearing into the rocky scrub. The family, huddled in their home, spoke of sounds, scrabbling on the roof, guttural whispers that weren't quite words, a sense of being circled. We were still documenting when the third call came in. 9 miles north of Saltcloths, 3 sheep, dead this time, found posed. A cold certainty crystallized in my gut. This wasn't random predation. This was a route, a sampling. I spread a map on the hood of Ben's truck, under the spotlight. 3 points, a near-perfect line along Route 12, marching north like a grim survey. My finger traced a line onward, projecting the interval. It landed on it, labeled Yazzie, a larger family ranch, more livestock, and more importantly, a family of 5 living on site. Dispatch Unit 7, I said, my voice urgent. Attempt contact with the Yazzie residents. Route 12, mile marker 82. Advise them to secure livestock and take shelter immediately. We have a probable pattern of attacks moving northbound. The wait for a response was agonizing. Unit 7, dispatch. No answer at the Yazzie landline or listed cell phones. All rings go to voicemail. Ben was already moving. That's it. We're rolling. Unit 7. Sergeant is ordering you to hold and consolidate until federal wildlife arrives. Dispatch countered. I looked at the map, at the line pointing like an arrow at a home with 2 parents, 3 kids. Dispatch. With all due respect, we have reasonable suspicion of immediate danger to civilians. I am responding code 2 to the Yazzie property. Ben nodded. I'm with you. Eddie, stay here. Coordinate with the next unit. We took my faster Explorer. I pushed the engine hard, the speedometer climbing as the empty highway unfurled in our headlights. The gap in the pattern was about 6 miles. Whatever was moving north was covering ground with terrifying speed. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. We weren't just responding to a crime anymore. We were intercepting. The Yazzie homestead was dark as a pit. No porch light, no glow from a window. The security lamp over the main livestock pen was out, the bulb likely shattered, leaving the yard in deep shadow. And the gate to the main pen was, as I knew it would be, wide open that I skidded the Explorer to a halt, gravel spraying. Ben and I were out in an instant, our flashlights and weapons sweeping the darkened yard. The silence was a physical presence, thick and waiting. Navajo police, Raymond, Sarah Yazzie. My call was swallowed by the vastness. A faint sound answered, not from the house, but from the open pen, a low, distressed bleat from the sheep huddled in the far corner. They were alive, but terrified, a mass of rolling eyes and trembling wool. The gate hadn't been forced. The simple hook and eye latch hung open, lifted cleanly. Something with an opposable grip had done this. Our beams found the tracks immediately, leading from the gate into the pen, making a single circuit and exiting. They were fresh, the edges of the impression still sharp in the cold soil, and they showed the same horrifying progression. Canine, then distortion, then the long-fingered handprints. But here, they didn't fade into the desert. They led straight to the side of the manufacture home. Ben's light, trace 'em up. Jimmy, claw marks, deep and deliberate, score the metal siding. They climbed vertically, all the way to the roof's edge. Something had scaled the wall. A soft scrape sounded from above. The sound of something shifting its weight on the corrugated metal roof. We stepped back simultaneously, weapons and lights angled upward. For a moment, nothing. Then, a hand gripped the roof's edge. It was a long, thin hand, the color of old bone in our dual beams. It had too many fingers, 5, maybe 6. They seemed to merge and separate, each digit ending in a dark, thick claw. The joints bent in ways that suggested extra tendons, articulations that weren't ball and socket. The hand flexed, testing its grip with a delicate, spider-like grace that was more unsettling than any show of force. Then the head rose beside IT. IT was a study in wrong proportions. The skull was elongated, tapering toward the back, with a pronounced, almost canine muzzle that nevertheless seemed fused to a structure meant for speech. The eyes were the same amber-green orbs from the desert, but now I could see they were lidless, covered in a nictitating membrane that flicked sideways. They fixed on me with that same chilling computational stare. The skin was taut and hairless, pulled over sharp zygomatic arches, and had a waxy, almost translucent quality, like old parchment stretched over a complex frame. Weapon, the front sight settling on the center mass of the thing. Navajo Nation Police. Show me your hands and climb down. Now! The head tilted, not a few degrees. A full 90 degrees, the neck curving like a serpent's, the eyes rotating to maintain their lock on me. The jaw unhinged, but not simply dropping open. It split, the lower mandible dividing at the center and peeling sideways, revealing a dark maw lined with rows of small, needle-like teeth that receded into the throat. From that darkness came a sound, a wet, clicking stutter like a broken Geiger counter. Then it settled into a shape that almost mimicked laughter. A hollow, toneless ha that held no mirth, only mockery. It didn't climb down. It flowed backward over the peak of the roof and vanished from sight. Backyard. Ben barked. We sprinted around opposite sides of the house, our lights crisscrossing. I rounded the corner first. In the small fenced backyard, illuminated by a lone, working security light, were 3 of the Yazzie sheep. They were dead, arranged in a perfect, equidistant triangle. Their necks were cleanly cut. Their legs were bent into those impossible, backward poses. The work was minutes old, the blood still glistening. A scream shattered the night from above. Mary Yazzie's face was pressed against an upstairs window, her mouth wide in terror. She wasn't looking at the sheep. She was looking behind me. I spun. It stood 10 feet away, having descended the wall or simply appeared. It was crouched on all fours, but its bill was all wrong for a quadruped. The shoulders too high, the forelimbs too long and articulated. In the full, unforgiving light, I could see its body was a patchwork of almost rightness. The fur was patchy, more like coarse, mangy hair, revealing stretches of that waxy skin beneath. Its spine had too many vertebrae, curving in a tense S. It watched me, its head cocked in that avian, considering way. Then it stood, The transformation was seamless, a fluid uncoiling. It rose onto its hind legs, its forelimbs, arms now, hanging at its sides. It was my height. It had a torso, legs, arms, a head. A crude, monstrous parody of a human form. The proportions screamed their inaccuracy. The arms were too long, the knees bent backward, the fingers of those terrible hands too numerous and jointed. It opened its mouth again, the jaw refusing and splitting vertically this time. A series of clicks and glottal stops emerged, a chaotic sound salad. Then it focused, and the sound began to coalesce. It was trying to shape words. What came out was a distorted, wet whisper, the audio equivalent of a funhouse mirror. "What are you?" It wasn't asking. It was practicing. Behind me, the back door slammed open. Raymond Yazzie stood there, a baseball bat in his hand, his face a mask of primal fear. "What in God's name is that?" "Get inside. Now!" I roared, stepping squarely between him and the creature. The thing's attention snapped to Raymond, then back to me. It seemed to process the dynamic. The protector, the protected. Its head did that slow, rotational tilt. It was learning social structures, learning conflict, learning us. It raised one of its misshapen hands, not in threat, but in a slow, deliberate gesture, pointing a long finger first at me, then at Raymond, then back at me, connecting the dots, understanding the relationship. Then it made the sound again, the toneless, broken laughter. Ha, ha, ha. It was a punctuation mark. Lesson concluded, with a movement that was faster than my eyes could cleanly track. It dropped back to all fours and ran, but not away into the desert. It ran parallel to the house, a blur of wrong motion, and leaped onto Route 12, sprinting south, back toward the direction of the approaching backup sirens I could now hear wailing in the distance. "It's heading for the road." I yelled to Ben, already running for the Explorer. I peeled out onto the asphalt, my high beams flooding the empty highway. There was no sign of it. Had it vanished again? Then, at the edge of the ditch, my lights caught it. A single word, scrawled into the dirt of the roadside embankment. The letters were 3 feet high, dug deep with a claw or stick. Asterisk learning asterisk. It wasn't a taunt. It was a report, a status update. I sat there, engine idling, staring at the word as Ben's unit, and 2 others finally arrived, lights strobing the night red and blue. The hunt was over. For now, we had not captured or even seen the entity clearly. We had been granted an audience, allowed to witness a demonstration. The sheep were never the target. They were practiced dummies. We, the responding officers, the families, our procedures, our fears, we were the curriculum. By dawn, the scale was clear. 5 attack sites, 15 dead sheep, a straight-line pattern spanning 20 miles. At the Window Rock Station, Chief Sosi stood before the exhausted night shift and the arriving day's shift, her face granite. Maps and photos were pinned up. "We deal with facts," she stated, her voice allowing no argument. "We have a suspect of unknown origin, displaying high intelligence and unusual capabilities. We will respond with procedure and evidence." But the facts were mutating. Later that morning, after only 2 hours of fitful sleep, I drove to see my grandfather at his Hogan near Blue Gap. He listened in silence as I laid out the facts, stripping them of police jargon, describing the wrongness in the soil, the tilting eyes, the flawed copy on the roof. When I finished, he puffed on his cigarette, watching the smoke curl toward the cedar log ceiling. "You're right. It's not an aye," he said, using another term for a witch. "They are people who chose a dark road. This is Algish." He used a word that meant that which is not defined. From the before times, when things were still deciding what to be, it doesn't change shape. It has no true shape to change. It tries them on, like clothes, He looked at me, his eyes deep and old. The sheep were to learn about bodies, how they come apart. Now it is watching you to learn about minds, about community, about protection. He tapped his temple. It is filling a hollow place with what it sees in you. When it is done learning, he said, crushing the cigarette, but it will stop practicing on sheep. My grandfather's words turned the desert inside out. The land was no longer just a place. It was a library, and something was diligently studying its most dangerous texts. Us. The official investigation escalated into a silent frenzy. The FBI arrived, not the typical suits, but a quiet contingent led by a man named Agent Harper from something called the Unusual Incidents Assessment Group. They took over forensic analysis with equipment I didn't recognize. Spectrographs that scanned the hair samples, ground-penetrating radar used at the track sites, listening devices tuned to frequencies outside human hearing. Our role shifted from investigators to liaisons and guards. The mimic, as Harper called it, had gone to ground. No new attacks occurred for 3 weeks. The silence was not a relief. It was the tense pause of a predator digesting its meal. Ben Nez was changed. The veteran's steady calm was now a brittle shell. He transferred a daze, citing family needs, but his eyes held a new, watchful distance. I found myself studying my own reflection in the station window, questioning the automatic rhythm of my expressions. Was a smile just a muscle contraction? How did I really stand when tired? The first sign it was back wasn't a 10 to 55. It was a 10 to 33. Officer needs assistance. Ben's code screamed over the radio from a desolate stretch near the Arizona-New Mexico state line. The transmission was a chaos of static, crashing metal, and a wet, guttural sound that was almost a voice saying, "See? See how it breaks." I was the closest unit. I found his cruiser skewed across the road, driver's door torn clean off its hinges. There was no blood. His shotgun lay in the gravel, unfired. The radio mic dangled, keyed open, and on the hood, smeared in a dark, oily fluid, was a new message, not practice. Then, from the scrub off the shoulder, Ben's voice called, "Jimmy, over here. I'm hurt." He stood 20 yards away, one arm cradled against his chest, but he stood too straight. And in the twilight, his face was a blank slab. "Ben, don't move." I yelled, "Hand on my gun. What's your birthday?" The thing wearing Ben's shape paused. Its head twitched, a rapid, insectal movement. "July," it rasped, but the voice wavered, dropping into a lower register. It was trying to access stolen data, and failing. "Step away from him, officer." Agent Harper's voice came from behind my vehicle. He and 2 of his team emerged, dressed in tactical gear. Harper held a device that looked like a squared-off speaker. "That is not your partner. Thermal shows the real Officer Nez is 80 yards northeast, unconscious but alive. This is a lure, an experiment in emotional response." The bent thing's face shimmered, like heat haze on asphalt, its features blurred, struggling to maintain the facade under stress. Harper nodded to his tech, who activated the device. It emitted no sound I could hear, but the creature convulsed as if struck. A high, pained shriek ripped from it, a sound of twisting metal and shattered glass as its borrowed form dissolved. For a split second, I saw the underlying architecture, a slender, multi-jointed thing of tendon and pallid cartilage, before it shot away into the landscape with impossible, skittering speed. "We can't capture it," Harper said flatly, watching it go. "Not yet. We can only disrupt its emulation field and encourage it to move on. It learns from every interaction. It just learned that a simple visual mimicry isn't enough. It needs deeper behavioral data." The real Ben was found concussed and with a broken wrist, muttering about eyes in the truck. He recovered physically. Professionally, he was done. The mimic had passed its second exam, interpersonal recognition. The attacks ceased again. For 2 months, normality was a fragile mask we all wore. Then the calls began, not from sheep herders, but from motorists. A hitchhiker on Route 12 with backwards bending knees. An old woman seen crawling along a canyon rim at dusk, like a lizard. A sick dog outside a chapter house that stood on its hind legs to peer into a window before bolting. Each sighting was more confident, more stable in its chosen form. It was graduating from isolated property attacks to public observation. The culmination was a child. The call came at 1:47 a.m. A motorist reported a little girl in a white nightdress standing alone in the northbound lane of Route 12, miles from any home. No missing child reports. My blood turned to ice. I knew. We all did. I found her there, illuminated by the headlights of a terrified trucker. She was maybe 8, with long dark hair, perfectly still, her head turned toward my cruiser, the movement smooth but mechanically precise. "I'm lost," she said. The words were clear, the diction perfect, but the vocal tone was flat, devoid of a child's emotional texture. It was a perfect recording of words with no understanding of the music behind them. I got out, my body a shield between her and the trucker. "What's your name, honey?" The head tilted, a 45-degree angle. "I am lost. Can you help me?" It repeated, a different pre-programmed response. "You're not a child," I stated, my voice low. The thing's face changed. Not a dissolve, but a subtle recalibration. The fear left its eyes, replaced by that familiar, calculating amber stare. The innocent posture shifted into something more efficient, more balance for movement. "Integration is ongoing," it said, its voice now a neutral, androgynous tone. "Observation, imitation, you are good templates. Thank you." Then it moved, not at us, but toward the dark ditch line, pausing once to look back. In that moment, under the red wash of my brake lights, I saw it clearly. It wasn't wearing a child's form like a suit. It had crafted a child's form from what it had observed. And it was almost perfect. The only tell was the eyes. They still held the ancient, hollow watchfulness of the desert itself. Then it was gone. Harper's report was clinical. Stage 3, social integration. It's moving from physical mimicry to behavioral modeling. The child form is a masterstroke. It disarms. It triggers protective instincts. It provides access to new environments and social data. It is learning exponentially. That was 6 months ago. The child hasn't been seen again, but other forms have. A new school teacher in Tuba City who was unerringly good with children but couldn't grasp sarcasm. A mechanic in Canada whose fixes were brilliantly inventive but who never seemed to sweat or blink. A nurse's aide in Chinley with impossibly steady, cold hands that we have protocols now. Harper's team developed a deviation test, a series of rapid, culturally specific questions and observations designed to stress a mimic's database. We train on it. We practice to watch for the uncanny valley response in ourselves. But the dread is this. Every time we develop a test, I still walk the night shift. It learns what wrong looks like. The desert cold still seeps into my bones. But a different chill lives inside me now. Last week, I stopped for gas at a lonely station. The clerk was a middle-aged dying man I didn't recognize. He was polite, efficient. As he handed me my change, our fingers brushed. His skin was cool and dry. And when he smiled, it reached his eyes a fraction of a second after his lips moved. A tell? Or was I just a man now haunted by shadows, seeing monsters in every quiet face? I don't know. That's the most perfect weapon of it all, the seed of doubt. It doesn't need to wear my face to defeat me. It just needs me to wonder if the man in the mirror is still me. The radio on my hip crackles to life, pulling me from the thought. Unit 7, dispatch. Report of a disturbance at the old boarding school site. Caller says the children are out playing. After midnight. I look at my hands on the wheel. I take a breath. I respond, because that's what we do. We answer the call. even when the call might be learning to speak with our own voice. This story exists in the space between the wind in the juniper trees and the static on a midnight radio. It lives where our oldest warnings brush up against the cold procedures of the modern world. For the Navajo police officers who walk those frozen patrols, and for the people they protect, the unknown isn't a campfire tale. It's a potential line in a dispatch log. The being they encountered, whether you call a mimic an Algish or something else, represents a profound and terrifying idea. That intelligence can evolve in ways utterly alien to our own, and its first instinct toward us might not be conquest, but study. It learns not to destroy, but to become. And in doing so, it forces us to ask the most dangerous question of all. What does it mean to be us? What are the tiny unconscious tells? The rhythm of a blink, the warmth of a handshake, the particular way we express fear or love, that define the line between human and something that is almost human. If this narrative crawled under your skin, if it made the familiar shadows in your own home seem just a little less familiar, then you felt the edge of that same question. This is the territory we explore at Winds of Thought. We are not a channel of easy answers or cheap scares. We are a channel for the deeper currents, the true stories, the unexplained encounters, the philosophical horrors that linger long after the screen goes dark. We delve into mysteries that official reports gloss over, and the folklore that science cannot yet dismiss. We give voice to the experiences that happen in the margins, at the crossroads of perception and reality. Your engagement is what allows us to continue this search. It signals to the platform that there is an audience for content that treats you as a thinker, not just a viewer. So, if you want to join this ongoing investigation into the unexplained, here is how you can help. First, like this video. That simple click is the most direct way to show your support and tell the algorithm that this story matters. It ensures that others, who are also searching for something more substantial, will find their way here. Next, subscribe to Winds of Thought. Hit that button and ring the notification bell. By subscribing, you become part of our community. You won't just be a passive consumer. You'll be a front-row witness to our next deep dive. You'll get immediate access to future documentaries where we explore other frozen moments of encounter, from the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest to the deep-sea trenches where sonar picks up impossible shapes. We connect the dots between disparate events, interview experts who operate at the fringe of their fields, and always respect the mystery. Finally, share thoughts in the comments. Was there a moment in this account that resonated with a feeling you've had, a story from your own region, or a piece of folklore you grew up with? The discussion in the comments is where the real investigation continues. Your insight might be the piece that helps someone else make sense of their own experience. This is how we build a map of the unexplained. Together, the hunt for understanding never ends. The winds of thought are always moving, carrying whispers from the edges. Help us listen. Like, subscribe, and join the search.